Lizzie Borden, top of page 110. She hoped he would come home a corpse. The case had come to another momentary standstill. But the fascination, the greedy fever for news grew steadily. No matter where a person goes in the city, in the country, or the river, or the seashore, the murderer continues to be the principal theme of conversation. The Fall River Herald reported. Many were not content to simply talk when they could go see for themselves. Friends, sweethearts, and whole families went out of their way to pass Taunton jail, trying to guess which window Lizzie Borden might be looking out of. A handful of women from as far away as Boston came knocking at Sheriff Wright's office that morning, asking to attend the jail's Sunday services, hoping for a chance to sing hymns alongside Lizzie Borden. The whole thing disgusted Sheriff Wright. "I do not believe that the public has a right to know anything about this girl's life within these walls," he informed the Herald. "When she gets up, and when she lies down, and what she eats and drinks, and when she does either, she herself wishes not to be disturbed, and I am not going to allow her to be disturbed, nor shall I relate these petty incidents of her life here." But someone with less integrity obviously blabbed, for the Herald reported that in spite of sleeping brokenly, Lizzie Borden rose refreshed at 6 o'clock with the rest of the prisoners and made her own bed. She did not partake of the fish hash served at 7 o'clock, making do with only a cup of coffee and a nibble of bread until her dinner arrived from the hotel at noon. Even Matron Wright was not above spilling a few scraps to the paper. By Monday, most of Bristol County knew she had lent Lizzie one of her own big feather pillows, a rocking chair and a stool, a white bedspread and pillow slip brought from home, as well as gifts of flowers and fruit, also softened the cell. Did Matron Wright believe Lizzie's guilt? The Herald wanted to know. "No, I can't. I said so to her when she first came, and the only emotion she has shown came then. She looked up at me quickly and said in a surprised way, 'Oh, you don't?' Oh, Miss Wright," and she threw her arms around me as if it was more than she could stand of relief to find anyone who had not turned against her. Reporters also flocked to Second Street. "I believe firmly in my sister's innocence," Emma told them in her brief statement. "She will have my full support and cooperation because I am certain she deserves it. The blow has been terrible for me to bear, but I cannot help it. My resources will be at her command." Lizzie's arrest even subdued her embittered Uncle Hiram Harrington. Before, he had relished the chance to tantalize the papers with the inside information. Now, with his niece behind bars, all his extravagant claims suddenly vanished. "I am sorry," he told the reporters as he turned them away. "I wish it could not have happened." Public opinion had veered just as sharply. Lawyer Jennings' motion to remove Judge Blaceville from the case had not budged the judge, but its effect on Fall River and beyond was remarkable. For a week the people had demanded an arrest, talking as though nothing stood between Lizzie Borden and the gallows. From Lizzie's face I read that she is deep at the bottomless pit and subtle as hell, void of soul or feeling. I read one anonymous letter to District Attorney Knowlton on the first day of the inquest. Less than a week later, the street corners were hot with the debates about the legality and justice of the whole affair. The question now was not whether Lizzie Borden had done it, but whether she would receive a fair trial. "The rights of a noble woman have been tramped upon by you and your bloodhounds, who, having run your suspicions to the end, are gloating over their object," an incensed woman wrote to Knowlton after Lizzie's arraignment. Jennings' criticism of the inquest had left the citizen particularly riled. Demands for the fact crowded the newspaper. That inquest, they declared, ought to have been public for the start. People had a right to know what happened behind those doors, just as they had a right to know what happened to Andrew and Abby Borden. Facts were indeed in short supply. As the story of the murder spread across New England, details began to blur and tangle. The most sinister tale purported Andrew Borden had told a friend that Lizzie was so troublesome she ruined the peace of the household. She refused to eat at the same table with him. When he was so much as accidentally walked in during her breakfast, she'd get up from the table and leave the room. And most damning of all, when he left the house, Lizzie told him she hoped he would come home a corpse, adding, "Probably you will before long." The chain of information was weak, the story second-hand at best, told by a stove salesman to a whaling captain on the porch of a Craigville hotel. Possibly it had come from a mill or a bank administrator before that, but if a paper as respectable as the New York Times printed it, how could it be false? The legend of Lizzie Borden was beginning to take root. Rumors and falsehoods. Incensed by the rumors, Lizzie's friend, Miss Bingham, told the Fall River Herald the story that she would not sit at the same table with her father is a falsehood of the blackest sort. It has been said that Mr. Borden was angry with and did not speak to Lizzie upon the return from Europe. That, too, is a falsehood, distorted out of facts that were as contrary to the statement as could be. Lizzie came home so late, Miss Bingham explained, that her parents had already gone to bed when she arrived. She had spoken out only a few words to Emma before going to bed herself. The next morning, Mr. Borden found her steamer chair in the hall and bounded upstairs 3 at a time to see and greet her, and Lizzie told me her hand ached all day, he pressed it so hard. Going downtown, he met a woman who said to him, "Well, I would guess that someone had come home, judging from your bright face this morning." In the absence of facts, newspapers were scourging for anything to fill the gaps. The Fall River Globe, usually the last place anyone would look for a reasoned perspective, remarked in an editorial, "It is hardly necessary to say that the published stories of the proceedings are very complete and fragmentary, perhaps some of them mythical." Before the week was out, Marshal Hilliard had accumulated a desk drawer filled with letters attempting to crack the case. Clairvoyants offered their services to the police for prices ranging from $8,000 to $2,000. One medium claimed to have received instructions from Andrew Borden himself. Another self-proclaimed detective told the marshal to examine the eyes of the murder victims, explaining that the last sight they saw remained imprinted on their retinas, plain as day. Clues, theories, and even confessions piled up. Most of them amounted to nothing. Like the pond, the police had been advised to dredge for the murder weapon, only to find a banana peel tied up in a paper sack. But to placate the public, Hilliard sent his men chasing down one blind lead after another. He would give the newspapers no chance to say he had left a clue unexamined, no matter how absurd. He had seen enough complaints from the press already. You and every other citizen must remember that the newspapers have not given anything near the facts disclosed at the inquest, a red-faced Hilliard complained right back to the reporter, who handed him a stack of 50 editorials denouncing the police department's conduct. "I think if you were to publish tomorrow the solid facts in the case, and all of them," he told her, "you would find that before night a great many people would suddenly change their minds." But no one knew the facts was talking. Not District Attorney Knowlton, not Lawyer Jennings, and certainly not Lizzie Borden. Under no circumstances will she open her mouth, said the Fall River Herald. Preliminary hearings. That is the first thing that I undertook to do that I never could. Monday, August 22nd, 1892. The thermometer had pushed past 80 degrees and continued rising. Inside Fall River's second-floor courtroom, it could only have been hotter. Spectators had been filling the seats since 11 o'clock, many of them ladies carrying their knitting and lunch baskets. Almost 36 reporters sat wedged behind tables they had procured from local furniture stores. In all, 300 people waited, not only to see Miss Lizzie Borden, but to finally hear the evidence against her firsthand, and learn whether it would be enough to send her to trial. The city hall bell struck 2, and Judge Blaisdell arrived. Then all eyes turned to the door of the matron's room. Lizzie Borden did not appear. Almost 20 hushed minutes passed before Lawyer Jennings entered, a scowl on his face. With him was Colonel Melvin Ohio Adams, an eminent Boston lawyer with a razor-sharp memory, a genius for cross-examination, and a record of unvarying success, who had been enlisted to Lizzie's defense team. The pair passed through to the judge's chambers, where they conferred so long with District Attorney Knowlton that even Judge Blaisdell could not keep his eyes from his watch. Another 30 minutes inched by before the 3 attorneys emerged, and Knowlton addressed Judge Blaisdell. "If it please your honor, there are some things used as evidence in this case which are wanting at the present time. The dress Lizzie had turned over to the police, among other things, was still being tested at Harvard. Consequently, we have agreed with the defendant's counsel to adjourn this hearing until Thursday, if it meets your honor's approval." Blaisdell approved, and so for 2 more days Fall River drummed its fingers. At her own request, Lizzie Borden waited out the continuance in Matron Hannah Riggins' room at the Fall River police station rather than return to the county jail at Taunton. Emma brought Lizzie's bedding from home and cooked her meals. Most of the time Lizzie lay on her cot and read. A few select visitors were permitted, and one of the matrons was always on duty to see to Lizzie's comfort as well as guard her privacy. The reporters never stopped coming, no matter how often the matrons turned them away. Inside 92nd Street While Lizzie sat undisturbed in jail, a sanctuary, as the New York Telegram wryly put it, from the sleuth hounds of the press, one reporter, a Miss Percy of the New York Herald, managed to talk her way into the Borden house for a look around. Goodness only knows who let her in. Richard had long since gone, and Miss Percy's article clearly states that she did not see any member of the family. However, she did it. Miss Percy got inside and was permitted to view the 2 rooms where the murders took place, as well as the parlor, dining room, and most astounding of all, given Emma Borden's feelings about privacy, the Borden sisters' own bedrooms. I was surprised to find the house extremely pretty and refined in its appointments, Miss Percy wrote. Easy chairs, shaded lamps, books, well-chosen bits of bric-a-brac, cushions and draperies, an open piano, 100 comforts and pleasing trifles, tastefully disposed, bespoke pleasantly the character of the occupants. The only room she did not care for was the guest room, its expensive black walnut furniture being of a heavy, gloomy style no longer in fashion. Lizzie's room held the most fascination, as dainty and charming a place as any girl need ask for, with its hand-embroidered blue bedspread and wealth of books and pictures. How could Lizzie Borden have come in the dainty place and remove the traces of such fearful work without marring all the delicate purity of everything with which she had contact? Miss Percy wondered why the washstand even is in a recess veiled by a pale silken curtain. A soiled finger pushing it aside would leave a mark, and there is none. Surrounded by her books and her friends and her sister's good cooking, Lizzie Borden passed the hours as pleasantly as could be expected under the circumstances. Even as the court date closed in, she could relax enough to enjoy a little merriment. The last afternoon before the hearing, she and Emma, Miss Brigham, and Miss Holmes sat laughing together over a bet Lizzie had made with Matron Reagan. The matron had wagered $1 that Lizzie couldn't break an egg. Well, I can break an egg, Lizzie said. Not the way I would tell you to break it, Matron Reagan teased. Lizzie negotiated the bet down to a quarter, and Miss Bingham fetched an egg. Lizzie followed the matron's instructions. Hold the egg between 2 clasped hands and try to crush it. And to her astonishment, the egg would not break. There was the first thing that I undertook to do that I never could, Lizzie marveled, much to her friend's amusement. In the middle of it all, Edwin Porter, a correspondent for the Globe, came up into the corridor asking for Matron Reagan. The matron was not pleased to be interrupted for the umpteenth time that week. That reporter has come after me again and told him that I had nothing to tell him, Miss Brigham remembered hearing her grumble when she returned to the room. Lizzie was back to her old mood. By 9 o'clock on the morning of Thursday, October 25th, the crowd gathered on Granite Street knew there was almost no hope of getting inside the courtroom. The seats had begun filling before 8, the officers on guard at the door awarding most of them to well-dressed young women. Even gentlemen had to make do with standing room once inside, but the people choking the sidewalks outside the police station were not willing to give up. They watched keenly as a curtained carriage pulled up to the public entrance. Someone was about to get inside. It was as if a silent signal passed among them. All at once the mob surged for the door, overwhelming the police and blocking the sidewalks and doorway entry entirely. At a gesture from Marshal Hilliard, the officers charged forward, pushing the crowd back at a run. Miss Emma Borden stepped quickly out into the space they had cleared and went straight upstairs to the matron's room. There she found her sister calmly rocking in a chair by the window. Emma kissed her, and Lizzie replied with a squeeze of her hand. Immediately they began talking as though they sat in their own front parlor instead of the police station. Not a word of the murder passed between them. Only Emma's cheerful face betrayed the ordeal to come. It was nearly time. The first and greatest revelation of the entire hearing came on the second morning. For a day and a half, medical examiner Dolan's questioning by District Attorney Knowlton and cross-examination by Colonel Adams had monopolized the stand. Adams and his endless arsenal of rapid-fire questions generated so much clinical talk of wounds and blood, spatters and gashes, that by the time Dolan began to describe the autopsies, the court was nearly numb to it. And then Colonel Adams asked, "Did you remove anything from those bodies, or either of them?" Dolan's eyes and voice both dropped. "Yes, sir," he said. "I removed the skulls, the heads." Shock and revulsion careened through the courtroom. Every head pivoted towards the Borden sisters. Startled Lizzie also looked to her sister. Emma could not cover her face or lower her head fast enough to hide her tears. Lizzie managed to mask herself behind the black fan. It was perfectly clear no one had told them, much less asked their permission. For what purpose? Adams asked. Because I was instructed to do so. The State Attorney General had given the order, Dolan explained. What did you do with them? Adams asked. I cleaned them. Cleaned was a comically delicate way of putting it. The man had boiled Mr. and Miss Borden's heads like soup bones until the flesh, their very faces, dropped off, exposing the battered and broken white skulls beneath. Adams, who could swerve from cordial to sarcastic in the blink of an eye, matched his tone to the gravity of the news. Do you mean to say these bodies are now buried without the heads? He asked. Yes, sir, Dolan answered. The public was incensed. Barbarous, they called it. The argument that every means necessary must be taken to bring the murderer to justice, no matter how revolting, hardly made a dent in the outcry. The bodies had been made sausage meat of, said one paper, proclaiming that the decapitation was more cold-blooded even than the crime itself. There were dull moments, too. Both Bridget and Uncle Morse's testimonies, though loaded with detail, left the public unsatisfied. They had hoped for splashy stories of the family's relations, of bitter arguments pitting parents against children. Instead, they got minute-by-minute accounts of the hours leading up to the murder, the meals, chores, and mundane mornings, habits common to most any family. Dull as it was, this turned out to be some of the most damning testimony. Bridget in particular accounted for the Bordens' movements so thoroughly that it became difficult to imagine how anyone could have snuck into the household unnoticed, much less remain unnoticed during the interval between the two murders. The combination of the intricate planning and sheer luck necessary to pull it off seemed awfully far-fetched. The logic was simple. If no one from the outside could get in, that left no one but Lizzie Borden to do it. As the testimony mounted, the public's attitude toward Lizzie's demeanor changed. Lizzie herself had not changed one bit. She never would. But the way the newspapers portrayed her did. Early on, many reporters had described her calm self-possession as wonderful, dignified, and remarkable. Now, with the shadow of guilt creeping ever closer, words like strange, indifferent, unfeeling, and abnormal appeared more often than not. Even at the recital of the gory details of the butchery of her parents, she showed no emotion. The New York Times claimed. Another correspondent saw it differently, as Dr. Dolan described his first ghastly sight of Mr. Borden's face. The New Bedford Evening Standard observed, Miss Lizzie closed her eyes with a look of real sadness and placed a small palm leaf fan which she had in hand over her face. The reporters all around her were nudging each other to look at Lizzie, but before they all had the opportunity to see the prisoner's grief, the fan was lowered and Lizzie was back to her old mood. Before her arrest, the Evening Standard had consistently referred to her as Miss Lizzie, or at least Lizzie Borden. It was common courtesy. Once she was behind bars, that courtesy began tapering off. Then became the hearing, and suddenly she became almost exclusively Lizzie, as though she were a child or a servant. Consciously or unconsciously, the Standard, and other papers too, were signaling to their readers that Lizzie Borden was unworthy of respect.